Welcome to the latest edition of Who's Better Baseball, the podcast where we answer a simple question on each show. Who's better at baseball? I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein, managing editor at justbaseball.com. We got Elijah Evans here, one of our writers who covers the AL Central for us. And it's a very simple question today. There any teams in this division that are actually good? AL Central, you got the Twins atop, and you got four teams altogether that are in it still because everyone's kind of bad.
Yep.
But pretty fair. I mean, that's we could just end the podcast there. The Royals are terrible. And I literally today went canvass the league like I do at the start of each week, trying to find stories on these teams. And I think the best I came up with, Michael Lorenzen, kind of good in Detroit, right?
Yeah. Michael Lorenzen's good. Yeah, he looks good. That is a story. It exists. It's there. But yeah, there's not a lot to talk about right now. It's a division where I originally thought at the beginning of the year we were going to see three teams that were at least all competitive with the White Sox, the Guardians, and the Twins. And I was hoping, it was going to be more of a three-team battle. This is more of a four-team try not to suck. And it's just how the division has shaken out this year, and it's unfortunate. There's other external factors like injuries and other such things that are playing a role, but at the same time, everybody deals with injuries. Every division has their injuries, and these teams just aren't very good in different ways, but in some similar ways. That's how it's been this year.
When I look at each team having a couple of pitchers that are doing well, I am actually almost curious, like, is Eduardo Rodriguez, pitching to a 2.13 ERA because he's facing AL Central lineups? Like, is that something that could be happening too here where, because it just seems like you try to find kind of the positive offensive stories on these teams, and there's just not a lot of players who are standing out in this division offensively, except for, maybe a Robert for the White Sox. I guess there's a couple, but doesn't seem like there's a lot of, if you're looking at all-star position players in this division, where are you looking?
Yeah, there's not many. There's definitely not many. I think there's, you look on some of the top rosters more. There's a few players on each team. I think, Riley Green just went out with an injury, which we talked about, but he was looking really good. He kind of was taking that next step to being like a true MLB caliber player. He showed signs of it. We always thought he was going to be good. He kind of has evolved into like a true quality outfielder in the league this year. He's definitely been the best overall offensive player on the Tigers. You look at the White Sox, as you said, Luis Robert is, as inconsistent as he can be, he is incredibly talented. He's hitting a lot of homers this year. He's driving the ball really hard. His rates are up there with the best of the league. So he's been good. The White Sox, Jake Burger. Most people don't know who Jake Burger is probably, but Jake Burger has been really good. He's the second best hitter on the White Sox by pretty much. He's actually probably better than Robert in some metrics, but I'd put him as the second best hitter on the White Sox this season. Beyond that, there's not much there. You look at Cleveland, Jose Ramirez for his standards is having a down season, but he's always going to be Jose Ramirez. I have no question about him being good. And then you look at Minnesota and probably Joey Gallo, maybe, he's been hurt twice on the 10-day IL, so it's hard to gauge kind of exactly where he's at, but he's been good when he's been on the field. So the offenses all around are just not good.
And each team, you could kind of point to specific players that have either dealt with injury or just kind of shockingly bad performance. Cleveland, Andres Gimenez, an article I think I might be writing this week is he might be kind of the case against the pre-arb extension because he had a bad 2021. He was incredible last year, looking like a top 5 second baseman in baseball. I think we might even have him in the top 3. Then now all of a sudden he looks like the 2021 Gimenez again. So you have that. You have Josh Bell, a couple other guys underperforming there. Go to Minnesota. You haven't seen the Buxton of old, even though he's been healthy. And you haven't seen Correa nearly enough. So there's some signs to point to there. Detroit didn't really have a bunch to start with. Chicago, like, where's Tim Anderson at and some of these other players? So it just seems like kind of stars across the board just haven't been living up to, the back of the baseball cards. And if they do, maybe we get a much more exciting race over the final 2/3 of the season.
Right. I think there's potential for that. And, these teams, it's not like there's not talent, especially, Detroit, I I don't see Detroit sticking in this race just because they seem to be at least a year or two off. You know, they've had some guys that have stepped up, and they've had some role players like Zach McKinstry and Zach Short that have, you know, been good. But I don't really see Detroit's talent level being able to maintain with the other three teams as much as the other teams have been bad. I am not sure Detroit sticks around, but I can see a world where any of Chicago, Cleveland, and Minnesota get hot and they turn on a spark and they look good. I mean, the White Sox have been the best team in the division since May, which is weird, and they don't look good, but they've been better than everybody else in the last few weeks at least. And Minnesota was by far better in April than everybody in the division. And Cleveland won the division last year, and you know Cleveland's pitching is really good. I mean, it's crazy to see a team like Cleveland struggle so much when you look at the rotation they're putting out there. And then you add in Tristan McKenzie, who came back yesterday or 2 days ago and was phenomenal. So, I mean, that team, you know, their pitching can get them on a roll. They just need some offense. I mean, Cleveland only has 2 players with a WRC plus over 100, which means they have 2 players that are at least league average or better. And it's Josh Naylor and Jose Ramirez who have WRC pluses of 101 and 102. So you have 2 guys that are even above the league average, and they're both basically league average. So, I mean, that lineup needs something. They have nothing going for them. But I can see a world where any of those 3 teams get a little hot, they get going, they have a nice little easy patch of a schedule here and there somewhere in the summer, and they kind of coast and they take control of the division. But it hasn't happened yet. It's like, why is this not happening? I mean, we've for 2 months now, Minnesota has had the opportunity to take over the division. Cleveland has been really bad on offense. The White Sox have been a mess in every department up until the last few weeks, and they just haven't taken off. And it's just like, where is that moment where one of these teams shows that they are actually a relevant competitive team? Because it hasn't happened yet. And I still think Minnesota is going to take a step like that eventually, just because I like the roster as it's constructed right now more than the others. But it just nobody's taking that step right now.
Well, I think what Minnesota has that these others don't is the depth of quality starting pitching. Now, granted, the Guardians do too, but I don't know if Shane Bieber is on this team. I feel like we're barreling very, very quickly into Shane Bieber is the top arm available on the market, and they're going to deal him. I think that's what's going to happen because ultimately Erod is pitching like the best arm that should be available, but you know, Bieber's track record as a former Cy Young might hold more weight. Not to mention Erod has an opt-out. Bieber has an additional year. So I think it actually might be 2 years beyond this season, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's only 1 beyond this season.
I
could be wrong.
Is it? Yeah, if you could check that for me. I don't know if it's 2024 or 2025. Regardless, he's definitely under control past this season. So teams who would be dealing for him get a little bit more. And I feel like in recent years, having that extra year like Luis Castillo, Frankie Montes, like that actually seems to be a trade target that kind of grabs a little more. So
yeah, Bieber's got 1 more year. So he's got 1 more year of arbitration. He should be looking at somewhere basically at 10 million this year in arbitration. So he should be looking somewhere at the 15 to 18 million, which for Shane Bieber is not anything crazy.
But for the Guardians, it can be. For the Guardians,
yes.
When you know you have a team that still looks around and sees a lot of young pitching, you think, well, here's a guy who's had a big velo drop the last couple of years, isn't even pitching at his former peak anyway, who you can trade now with control in a market that doesn't have a lot of starting pitching, where teams might just be more inclined to say, all right, change the scenery, bring him over. Yeah. He could be that ace again. That's where I see the Guardians potentially falling out of this a little bit. Now,
yeah, I don't know. The thing with the Guardians is I don't know if that means falling out for them.
That's what I was about to get to.
They're a weird team. Yeah, go ahead. No, well, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's my thing. So I could see them like they're the team that makes that move, has been hanging around 500 for some reason. They just turn it on in the second half. That's what I think the Guardians are the team in this division that if the Twins or the White Sox don't grab it, the Guardians with a good manager might find their way again stealing it. But
that's exactly right.
At the same time, I feel like just looking at baseball logic, if you say, here's what we've seen this season with the Guardians, their most dependable veteran starter could be out the door. And then you look at what still might be around in Chicago and Minnesota. Those are the 2 teams that, like, on paper should contend for this division this year.
Right.
But we've seen the recent history.
Yeah, it's tricky. But like you said with Cleveland, I mean, with their situation is so unique because unlike Chicago and Minnesota, Minnesota has depth of quality arms and consistent arms. Cleveland has depth of stud prospect arms. We've
Yeah.
already seen Tanner Bybee come up. We've already seen Logan Allen come up, and they've both been successful. You trade Shane Bieber, oh, no big deal. You have Gavin Williams with a 1.93 ERA between AA and AAA coming up and probably shoving. He's a terrific pitcher. He's a top 50 prospect for Just Baseball. I mean, he is really good. So that's the issue. If you can find a way, I know Peter and Arm talked about this in the Just Baseball show, and it's tricky to figure out what a trade would look like here. But if you can find a way to turn Shane Bieber into hitting and replace him with your 20-year-old stud pitching prospect, that's not the worst case scenario. And I know it's like, yes, you're moving off of a guy who's won a Cy Young. He's been in the face of your rotation for a while, but there's a world where it makes the Guardians better in the short term. And there's also a world where it's not, and they punt and it's just, Bieber for prospects straight up. And you just, you hope Gavin Williams fills his spot, and that's it. And that's the move.
Yeah.
But I can see them taking that step. I can also see, as much as I don't agree with it, and I hope it doesn't happen, I can see a world where the White Sox buy. It doesn't seem logical, and I don't believe in this core right now as a White Sox fan, and I've been out on them for this whole season for the most part. But there's a situation where this team is desperate enough and they want to win based on, the expectations set a few years ago from this rebuild. And 2021, they looked like a top 7-8 team in baseball for the entire season in 2021, despite injuries, despite Tony La Russa managing. I mean, there was a lot of factors and they were still good. So it's only 2 years ago the White Sox were in that position. So I can see a world where they say, you know what, we're just going to buy. We don't think we're going to get that much at the deadline for a lot of our pieces. I mean, if you look at the pieces the White Sox could realistically trade right now, it's really, I mean, maybe Cease, obviously, but in terms of the guys that are more like the obvious trade candidates, the only one you're really getting much for right now is Giolito, which is crazy to say considering how he pitched last year, but he's been good this year, and the starting pitching market is really thin. So if that's your only piece you're really getting much for, you're getting 2 decent prospects from somebody for the rest of rental for Giolito. If that's the only trade value you're going to get, there's a world where they buy. I mean, the White Sox have a few. I don't know if it would be smart. I don't think it would work very well. But if you're only a few games back in the division and nobody's taking control of this division in July, this team is still talented enough to win the division. I think on paper, the White Sox, if Dylan Cease is starting to show he's back in form right now, and Giolito's been good, Kopech's been phenomenal the last month of the season. Lance Lynn is something else, but besides the point. If those guys are in form and you add a few pieces, there's a world where the White Sox take over the division. So it's just a mess. I mean, it really is.
I feel like with both the Guardians and the White Sox, you're kind of caught in the middle of, it's about getting the right couple pieces and trying to go on a little bit of a run. Whereas with the Twins, because they have Sonny Gray, Joe Ryan, Pablo Lopez, all it takes is Correa and Buxton being healthy and playing like Correa and Buxton, and they could take off. And I feel like that's why, because of the pitching they have, that's why they're in front in this division. And because of that fact, I feel like they have still the best chance to ultimately run away with this thing. But they just still have not shown it up to this point.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, as you said, I mean, they should be running away. That's when you look at it straight up. I mean, the Guardians are one of the bottom 3 offenses in all of baseball. Their offensive numbers are at the same level as the A's and the Royals. Like, it's that bad. And the White Sox are just not good overall. I mean, the White Sox have had moments of good, but no facet of the White Sox is like, oh, that's a strength of the team. There's really not. There's not a place to go other than Luis Robert, whatever he's hitting in the lineup, and Jake Berger every other day. You're not looking at the team and saying this is a good team. I mean, lately it's every time Kopech starts, which is exciting to see is for the future. But there's not a strength of the White Sox, and the Guardians. Yes, there's a strength of pitching, but the offense is so bad. Meanwhile, Minnesota, again, if you get Gallo, Buxton, and Correa healthy and performing, that's a team that should win this division. And you factor in, they have a few other guys. I mean, they can start calling up. They could bring back up Edward Julian, who was impressive at times. Kirilloff's been solid. Jorge Polanco was hurt a lot of the year, but has looked good when he's been on the field. So they have depth in their lineup. They have the big 3 starting pitchers, like you mentioned. They have some pitching depth, enough to keep them going. They have a closer who throws the junkiest pitches I've ever seen in my life. That those pitches should not exist that Duran throws. It's a team that should win the division. But do I really believe in the Twins to make ads at the deadline to push them over the top? I don't know. I mean, they haven't. yeah, they got Mally last year, and they've done some things here and there, but it's like I don't know if they're gonna push all in for a team like this, and in a league where what is the winner of this division getting? A matchup with the Astros or the Rays where they get absolutely demolished in the first round. I mean, right? Yeah, maybe they beat a wild card team, maybe, but the wild card teams are Baltimore, New York, Seattle, Texas, Houston. I mean, those are the types of teams you're facing in the wild card, and those are all better teams than any of these teams. So it's like, what is the as much as it's hard to phrase things like this from a team's perspective. Obviously, you have to try to win your division, but what does the winner of this division get? A first round exit, most likely, maybe a second round exit. There's no world in my mind where I see any of these teams making a significant run in the playoffs. It's in the American, considering how good the American League East and West have been this year. It's just there's just not a lot to play for, and it's like I feel like it's a poor long-term decision for any of these teams. Maybe the Twins are the most logical just because of their current situation. I don't think any of these teams should really be going all in on this season.
Yeah, I think because of that fact, it gets me back to the Guardians as like this weird team that could go on a run.
Right.
The White Sox as yes, that maybe they're the one dumb enough to push chips into the table
Right.
and it works out for them. And then the Twins as just a team that even if they do nothing, should make it out
Yes.
of this division.
Yeah.
And
It's
the
tricky.
Tigers would
And
have to be some Cinderella story that we can't foresee.
I mean, who knows? You never know with the Tigers. I honestly, the division is bad enough where there is a possibility that that happens. I don't think it happens, as I said earlier, but who knows if Riley Green comes back in a month and he's raking, and Torkelson has looked better the last few weeks than he had earlier. He's starting to put it together a little bit. And I mean, I don't know. There's crazier things that have happened considering how rough this division is.
Well, on June 6th, let's close it out here. I'm asking for a prediction now. Who wins this division 2023?
Yeah, I have to go Minnesota. I
Yeah.
really want to say Cleveland because I think Cleveland has, like we saw last year, they have the it factor that if they get going, they will get going. And we saw them last year. They weren't winning this division earlier in the year last year, and they for part of the year, and they, the last 2-3 months of the season last season, they completely took over and just ran the ship. So I want to say Cleveland, and I think they keep it close, but just because of how atrocious their offense has been, I have to say Minnesota, just because I think they're there. But I don't think this is going to be a race that's over anytime soon. I think we're going to see these teams continue to battle each other for mediocrity for the next few months. And I think if I had to put numbers on it, I think the Twins win. I think Cleveland finishes 2-3 back. I think the White Sox finish 4-5 back. I don't think I think it's a tight division all the way, honestly. But I think Minnesota will eventually get it done because they are the more well-rounded team of the three.
Give me Kansas City. That's gonna be all.
Yeah, there you go.
For this edition of Who's Better Baseball. Make sure you check out all the written content we got coming at justbaseball.com. And subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.